sure a lot of people are going to have feedback or questions.
It's on.
No problem. I'll be right here.
Okay. All right. There's still a few people who are roaming around downstairs to try to finish cleaning up. I'm sure they'll join us in a few minutes. But I want to have a prayer and kind of get the ball rolling here. I know some of you may have questions and ideas and feedback, so I want to provide time for that. Let's go ahead and have a prayer and just ask the Lord to be with our discussion. Lord God, just thank you for the saints here, my brothers and sisters. We're here because we love you. We love your church. We love your truth. And we love evangelism and a desire to grow and to reach our community. And we just pray for unity as we discuss plans. Lord, help us to hear each other clearly. And I pray that you direct our path in this discussion. I don't know if we will make a vote tonight, but I pray that if there's a desire for that, I pray that you make it clear. If we need more time to contemplate and think, I pray that you make that clear to us as well. These things we ask in the name of Jesus. Amen. You can see the date is a long time ago because we already had one meeting. We're having a second meeting because a lot of people missed the first one. My goal for this meeting is very similar to the last one. So if you were already at the last meeting, most of this should be review for you. It looks like we do have some people that weren't at the previous meeting, so I'm glad for that. Thank you all for being here. I do really appreciate your participation, involvement, and care. I'm going to share some ideas and thoughts, and then I'm going to ask for feedback, okay? So the first question that I think we should ask ourselves is, why would we want to build a building? What is our goal? Why do we even think that should be discussion? Okay? And the answer, at least in my mind, and you can help me out on this if you have differing ideas or something to add to it, but essentially what happens in particularly American churches is when a church reaches a certain capacity, it cannot grow anymore. And they've done studies to show that once a church reaches approximately 90% capacity, both in the parking lot and in the seating capacity of the church is at that's it. It won't grow from there. I've talked to a few people and asked them, what is max capacity here? I don't know the parking lot answer, but our parking lot answer is a bit confusing considering we're kind of using the parking lot over there. It's not ours, and so we're kind of, and there's obviously some days you come to church and all of the parking spots around this are completely filled, and we're overflowing, of course, over there. I've asked some people, and they've said 130 is approximately what would be like max capacity for this room. And the question is then, where is our current attendance? So, before Delta variant, our attendance was right about 100. We'd get 105, 95. We were bouncing back and forth around 100 or maybe just a little under. Since the Delta variant, it's gone down a little bit. And we're bouncing around 85, 90. But anytime we have like an event, like the week that Dr. Saman was here, we were at max capacity, 130. Or there was a children's event or something like that, and we got up to 125 that week. So as far as events, we are maxing out. as far as regular current attendance, we're not. Part of that is still yet COVID. We still have a number of members who have yet not come back, and we actually have. I've been meeting people at the door over the last couple of months, and I asked them, "Hi, my name is Joseph. What's your name?" And where do you normally worship is one of the questions I asked them. They said, "Oh, here." So I'm meeting members of our church that I've never met still. And so that's good news. We're seeing some people come back, but there's still a significant amount of irregularity, especially among like our Caribbean church members. And there's a lot of people who still are viewing from home. There's a significant number. If all of our family regular attending members that are still viewing from home were here, we would be at like 115-ish every week, consistently 115-ish. Which if you're at 115, you're already at 90% capacity. Does that make sense? So, to answer the question, why are we even talking about this? Because if our members were here, we are at 90% capacity, and we cannot grow through that. We really, if we want to continue to spread the gospel, reach people, we only have two options. Option number one, plant a church. Option number two, build a church. So we've already been through two church plants, Buford Family and Braselton, and successful. They were successful. We're thankful. In fact, I don't know if you guys heard the update, but Braselton is just now officially becoming, going from a, what do they call it? Going from a company to a church. So praise the Lord. I mean, that's like, it's just wonderful news, you know, and those brothers and sisters over there have put in a lot of work to achieve that, but as the parent church, there's a little bit of pride in our hearts too, right? That we're so happy. We're so happy for them. So we've been through the church plant process. We know what that looks like. At least you all do. I wasn't here. And there's still been a strong desire to build. So what would a building be able to achieve that a church plant would not? That's one of the questions that's on our minds, right? Like, what could we get out of a church building project that is a larger church building that we can't get out of a church plant? So here are some possible answers to that question. One is the possibility of doing broader evangelistic outreach opportunities. For example, we held the church school supplies ministry here, and for a little while, for about 2 hours there, we were packed. We were jamming in there, and we were taking in as many people as our facility was prepared to handle at that moment. If we had a larger building and more members, which would naturally occur with a larger building, we could possibly service our community with some outreach projects better than we can right now. So one reason for a larger building is we could actually serve the community better than we are serving it currently. And the other reason, obviously, church growth, evangelism is one. Outreach opportunities that we can't really do within the purview of this building. And finally, one of the ideas that's on our mind is more opportunities for social gatherings. Particularly think of Saturday evening social gatherings like this hour, especially in the winter, getting together and having recreational things together. I grew up in a really small church, actually seats probably similar capacity to this, but we had a tiny little church school, which means we had a gymnasium. And so a lot of Saturday nights we'd get together, and everybody that was young at heart was playing volleyball, and those that were not young at heart were, I don't know what they were doing, playing board games or whatever it is they were doing. So it was just fun. It was fun to have more social opportunities. This building affords some options like that, but it doesn't have something like a gymnasium. That's one of the reasons why we're considering something multifaceted. So one of the ideas that we're considering is something like this. You can see that all those little squares here, I'll turn around so I can point. This outline here is a basketball court. It's not a full-size basketball court, more like a junior high-sized basketball court. That's one of the ideas, is to have an auditorium that is multifunctional. So you can see all these little tiny squares are chairs. And here is, and you probably can't read it, but it says platform. Battery's dead on this. And so there at the top center is the platform. And this building would look and function more like what you would see in a regular elementary school gymnasium. It would have floors that you would be able to have church on, have potluck on, and also do sports on Saturday evenings. That's the idea that's currently being considered. And we would have storage to rearrange the tables and chairs in whatever format. So we're having church. As soon as church is over, we flip the room and we bring the tables out, and bam, that we eat in the same spot that we were having church. And the platform would be like possibly like a raised platform that you could store racks full of chairs and tables and then pull them out. And maybe have another storage room. That's one of the ideas. That's the main idea that we've been thinking of. Also, there's some, we would have, if you want to play sports in a building, it has to have pretty high ceilings. One of the ideas that we're considering is having, possibly, we've been told it's very expensive in a room with very high ceilings, so it's a possible idea. I don't know if it'll happen, but you know those dividers, and I've actually seen those dividers. Like you go to conference centers, they have those dividers where they can divide a larger room up into a smaller room. That's a possible way of making this building more multifunctional. So for example, like you could have a divider that goes across the room this way, and you could have the chairs set up here for church, and then back behind it we could have back here, like this half of the building, all set up for potluck. Especially as we're still growing into the building. One of the things that's awkward, and I was speaking with I think it was Lorraine about this, that when you have a massive room and you don't have enough people to fill the room, it feels very empty. But with something like dividers, suddenly the room shrinks and it doesn't feel like that anymore. And you have two rooms. You have a church and then you have a potluck area. And you can actually do the same thing in many other ways. But that's just one of the ideas that we're throwing around. Now, one of the main questions that many of you are probably thinking is, why would we want to do this? Why can't we just have a dedicated church and a dedicated gymnasium / potluck multi-purpose room? That's a good question, and really, that's what this is. You see here is the picture I already showed you, the gymnasium with the Sabbath school classrooms, the kitchen, etc., the bathrooms here, and the entryway. And this is a dedicated sanctuary. But what we're looking at is considering this is phase 1, the first step in the project, and this is phase 2. Why? For financial reasons primarily, because as we'll talk about in a little bit, how much just phase 1 alone costs, we think that it may be the most responsible thing to do, financially speaking, to just start with this. And once we have this completely paid for, then we could move on to this, hopefully in the future. I'm going to open up now for questions. I'm sure that we're going to come to some of these questions down the road, but yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Phase one, what would be the estimated cost and possibly terms of the loan?
Yeah, give me a second because I have a breakdown. It's all written down, and I'm going to show you the breakdown of the loan, where we would get the funds for that. But that's a good question. Does anybody else have questions just about like the structure, the outline, like why this layout, or feedback on that? Go ahead, Elion, and then Eddie.
What is the capacity of phase one?
Yeah. First of all of these are rough sketches. Marty, do you want to answer that?
Well, I just want to give a number.
Okay, go ahead, Marty.
That auditorium has a capacity of just a little bit over 400.
Yeah, so first of all, let me answer that question in two ways. We've talked about the idea of how big of a church we would really want to have, okay? And as we were talking in both the growth committee and in the church board, we said, we don't really dream of being bigger than 250, 300. Once you get that big, we imagine planting again. But when we talked with the architect, we said we want a multi-purpose facility that you can play sports in and worship in. And so he drew us this because that's how much just a youth-sized court would take to fit. And so we asked him, well, how many seats can you put on a youth-sized basketball court? And he said 400. That was actually a little bit bigger than we had imagined, but that's how big you need if you want something for just a youth-sized basketball court. Could we make it smaller and just make it the size of a volleyball court and put fewer seats? Yeah, we could. And not play basketball, just play volleyball or whatever. There's options, there's ideas here, like we can make the court even smaller. It doesn't have to be the official junior high size basketball court or whatever. But this drawing could fit basically 400 seats on it. Eddie had a question.
It was the same question.
Oh, he had the same question. Okay, somebody else had a question? Scott, did you have one? Or John?
This is probably really kind of a dumb question, but are there enough rooms for all the Sabbath schools?
Yeah, so
somebody counted that out.
The answer to that question is we're not sure. So over here on this wing, you see there's no bank of classes, and so we could add more classrooms over here, or if we had the dividers, then we would have all the space we would need if we had dividers. And with a room that is this big, we hopefully should have plenty of space to have breakout rooms because the chairs are movable. Think about it. With pews, it's harder to create classrooms here and a classroom there. But with movable tables and chairs, we could, for example, we might leave this quarter of the auditorium set up with a couple of round tables for different Sabbath school class. Imagine there would be a Sabbath school class here, Sabbath school class here, Sabbath school class here, and then we'd set up like 2/3 of the auditorium ready for church seating or whatever. So there's a lot of flexibility in a space like that. This classroom here is a Sabbath school. This is a Sabbath school. This is a Sabbath school. I think this is supposed to be an office. And then here is cradle roll and kindergarten with toilets in between because that would be very useful for little kids that need to go potty frequently. I think this was intended to be like a mother's room, and then this is a kitchen. None of this is set in stone. We just asked for like a general, like, give us something that looks something like this to get discussion started. The next stage with the architect is what they call, I just realized that I've been standing to the side and not all of it's being picked up. Can you give me the mic? What was I going to say? The next stage with the architect is something called, what do they call that, Marty, where they count the numbers and...
It's like a discovery exercise where we sit down and identify people, Sabbath school teachers and all that, and we go through a space analysis.
Yeah. So Marty doesn't have a microphone, so I'm going to repeat it for those who are viewing online. But the next stage is what's called a space analysis exercise, okay? And in the space analysis exercise, we go through all the questions of how many Sabbath schools, how many kids would attend in a particular Sabbath school class, and how many, and we figure out all those details. And then we get a more definite picture of square footage and all that stuff. We aren't at the stage that we are able to evaluate those questions, but all those questions would come if we decide that we want to build, if we decide we want to build something like this or something not like this. The next, at some point, we have that conversation with the architect. He asks us all the questions, every possible like square footage and all that stuff. And then we come to the question of how many classes we need, all that stuff. That's partially down the road. But this design, suffice to say, is flexible. Does that make sense? Because you can put more classes over here or divide this space. Yes, Scott.
Yeah, has this already been zoned for this?
Yes. According to Marty, we have the appropriate zoning.
Okay,
You all,
'cause how many-
y'all
how many-
know where our property is, right? It's,
Yeah.
It's almost a stone's throw from here. If you go down county line, it's like 1/8 of a mile
You make
down
that-
the road on the
Make that-
right.
Do you make that corner? Yeah. Oh,
So right after you go down County Line Road, you pass the intersection, you pass this first intersection, you go about 1/8 of a mile further, and there's an open space there. There's a white building, the Legion says something about the Legion on it, and right after that, that's our property.
well, is there any, could there be any plans for, because have you talked to the people? I mean, we know what we would want, and we're discussing it here, but how about the people around there? A lot of people think church just brings traffic, and they don't, they get out of taxes, and they don't welcome churches as much as we think they would. They don't. And we had I was at a church where they had zoning problems, and they thought it would just pass, but nobody wanted a church there because they didn't want the traffic. And so I was allowed to put a garden there while they were fussing about the zoning, and everybody around there loved the garden. So I was going to pitch the idea of some green space, at least,
Yeah, I'll show you an outline. Give me a second here. Let me flip the slides, and you'll see this is an outline of our total property. And you see this is what I called phase 1 in the previous slide. So phase 1, see this outline here is the total size of our property. This is the outline. Now back here is the city park, and over here was what was the Lions Club or whatever it was. And that has been donated to the city as well, and they're going to extend the park. So we're going to be surrounded on this whole side here by park. And this is a little bit of a subdivision, but these are backyards here. You can just see the backs of some people's houses on this side. And then this is County Line Road. This right here is County Line Road. So what you can see is we actually have a significant amount of space for expansion. And I'll show you another picture of what it looks like with phase 1 and then phase 2. And then you see we brought the parking lot all the way around now, extended the parking lot. These other pictures that you're seeing on here is like possible pictures of what it could possibly look like on the outside and what it could possibly look like in the auditorium, and what a lobby could possibly look like. And this picture here is phase 2, the dedicated sanctuary, what that could possibly look like. All of that's probably hard to see from where you're sitting right now, and we could show you larger pictures, but all of that is just purely conceptual. It's just some, rendering or what some other church has done, and it's nothing definitely predictive. We have no idea what our facade looks like. We decide that later. Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, the architect. Who is the architect, and if, as far as their previous work, have they ever done churches before?
Do you want to tell the story, Marty?
No, go ahead. I've told him that.
Okay.
I just haven't heard it.
Yeah. So we asked the conference, hey, we're in this building project and all this stuff, and we were surprised that the conference the conference doesn't have like a suggested architect, And you would think that by now the conference would be like referring because they've done it so much. But surprisingly, no, that's not their process. So we went on this. But by the way, I should maybe even back up a little bit further. We had a previous building project idea, and we had an architect. And we invested significant number of time, energy, resources into that relationship, and then decided that the design that we came up with is no longer what this church dreams of, nor is it probably in the budget of what we want either. And so at that point, we decided we probably need to start with a different architect that understands more clearly what we want and start from scratch. We were searching all over for an architect. We were talking to people in Colorado, people in Minnesota. We were talking to one of the things that we were considering is like a steel structure that can be built very quickly, built very rapidly, and an auditorium, like the steel pole beam structure, but you can still make the facade look nice. And so we were talking to companies that do that type of thing, and we were talking to all these different people. Somehow it came full circle back to some architects that actually have built a bunch of churches for our conference. And we talked to them, and then so finally we said, let's call the conference and get a reference on these people, because supposedly they've done churches in our conference. So we call the conference and oh yeah, we love these people. But actually, even more than these people, we liked the guy that used to work with them that broke off and now lives in Florida, but has also built a bunch of churches in our conference, and they are great. So after conversation with the larger group, we weren't sold on them, so we talked to the guy that had broken off and now lives in Florida. We really liked him a lot. And let me give you a little bit more background story. And this story is really not just an answer of who is our architect, is he experienced, but this story that I'm going to tell now is more a story of, is God leading in this? We were discouraged, to put it frankly, after investing so much time, energy, and resources into a whole other dream that never came to fruition. And we were gun-shy about throwing a bunch of money into something again because the last plan never came to fruition. And so we talked to the architect, and we're like, look, we don't want to waste your time or take advantage of you, but we already went down this road before and it didn't go very well, and we have some ideas, we have some dreams, some ideas. We don't want to waste your time, but is there any chance you could just give us some conceptuals? And he said, that's not a free service normally. But I prayed about it, and I feel really convicted that I want to help you guys out. And all the stuff that you're looking at is done for free. By this guy, and he's not a Seventh-day Adventist, but he's an architect that has built multiple other Seventh-day Adventist churches in our conference. And he's a very spiritual man. And just our experience with, Marty and I talked with him a few times, we really, really appreciated him. One of the other issues that we had with our previous architect is he was always talking architectese. We couldn't understand him. He was talking over our head. He couldn't speak, normal people language. And that was a lot different with this current architect, Kevin. He talks in language we can understand. And so far in our relationship, we told him, look, we don't know if this is even going to fly. We haven't voted on this. We just need some conceptuals to throw to the church and see what they really want. And then we'll come talk to you. And we don't have any obligations to this architect, but so far we really like him. I hope that answers your question and gives a little bit of history background of God's leading. Any other questions? Yeah, Marty, you want to fill in some more details on that? Again, can you pass the microphone to him quickly? Because there are some people viewing online.
I don't see why we wouldn't tell him the name of the person, the architect himself.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, it's Kevin Goins.
Kevin Goins.
Yeah.
And he lives in Florida.
Panama City Beach.
Panama City. Okay. Is there any other questions about layout? We're going to get to money and some other questions. Go ahead. We'll wait for the microphone, please, because there's people viewing online. They want to hear.
There are other churches that have started out with a gymnasium first, and it's taken years and years to get the church. And we need a church too, and I know that would service both. What would be so bad about getting the church first, getting it paid for, and then building a gym? Yeah, so you guys keep asking questions that have to do with financial stuff, and I was going to try to save the financial stuff for after, but let me because
Because your question, I think, touches a lot on financial. Let me go through the financial, and then we can ask more questions about layout. Is that okay? Yes. All right. So, oh, this is some larger pictures of possible phase 1 interior image, a little bit larger so you can see. Basically, a gymnasium. It looks like a gymnasium. That's what the idea is. Possible outdoor image. Possible. This is phase 2, the dedicated sanctuary. Larger image. So how does this solve some of our current problems? We talked about that. It solves space. Now, how much will it cost? Approximately, phase 1, we believe, will cost approximately $3 million. Phase 2, if built first, by the way, phase 2, the way that the structure is created, doesn't have any Sabbath school classes or anything like that. So if we took all the Sabbath school classes and put that onto phase 2, it would also cost probably $3 million. We don't know, okay? So phase 1, that includes, phase 1, and the $3 million includes everything, okay? That includes land work, that includes plumbing, that includes a parking lot, that includes putting in the utilities, that includes the building, that includes finishings, that includes furniture, that includes the kitchen, the appliances, the PA system, that includes everything, okay? What was the number approximate per square foot, Marty, that they were saying?
The cost of square foot?
Cost per square foot.
It's, at the time we were talking, it was approximately, for a finished move-in cost, is $300 a square foot.
$300 per square foot. So we were looking at a phase 1 square footage of somewhere around 12,000 square feet. And so that roughly works out to approximately 3 million, or a little over 3 million. So we might be able to size it down a little bit, get more like 10,000. That's probably going to be closer to 3 million, okay? Let me explain a little bit more about the money. So where can we get all this money from? Because $3 million is a lot of money. So there's a few things. First of all, the conference has a grant. The grant is based on square foot, okay? The conference will give a grant based on square footage. And the way that it works out is it'll come out approximately for our building something like $200,000 or $300,000 as a grant. That means money you don't pay back. The conference is giving it to you. The next thing is current funds. How much money do we have in the bank? Okay. The money that we currently have in the bank in all of our funds, our emergency fund, in the Southern Union revolving fund, our regular working funds, the funds that have already been spoken for, like people donated directly to Sabbath School, and you can't just take that money out of Sabbath School and spend it on something else. The total amount that we have in the bank currently is approximately $200,000. But what do we have in the building fund? We only have approximately $40,000 in the building fund. Now, some of the monies that we have on hand are liquid, meaning we could move them from other funds into the building fund if we wanted to. Others are not liquid. We can't just grab that money and take it and transfer funds. So if we wanted to be really aggressive in our reorganization of our funds, we could put potentially more in the building fund. But I mean, we're talking less than $100,000 for sure, okay? Less than $100,000 is what we have on hand in the building fund, towards $3 million. So you got $100,000-ish in hand. You've got $200,000 to $300,000 in the grant fund. And then we have the possibility of fundraising, okay? Fundraising is the next thing. And in the process of fundraising, we talked with the conference. And we asked them, what would a fundraising project look like? How does it work? And the conference has a really well-developed plan and process for fundraising. In fact, our stewardship director at the conference has spent a significant amount of time in developing like a whole, like if you're going to do a fundraising project, what you would do every week for 6 months, like leading up to the main event of the fundraising project. So it's really well-designed, developed program, and he's done quite a bit of work on the program and has tested it out and has seen experience. And I said, well, what would a church of our capacity likely be able to raise in a fundraising program. He says the way that they suggest doing the fundraising program is the fundraising program would last a 3-year period of time, where essentially each of us would make a pledge. What could I give over 3 years? And I said, well, what would be reasonable expectation for a church of our standing? So our current tithe amount is a little over $300,000 per year. Our current yearly tithe is a little over $300,000 per year. That means in 3 years, we're right about $1 million over 3 years, tithe. He said that if you had a really successful fundraising campaign and it went well, you should be able to raise about $1 million in 3 years. You could raise a double tithe, is what he believes. And that's his experience with fundraising. So we could raise $1 million in fundraising, which, and then also we have the loan that we get from the conference. How do we qualify for a loan, and what options do we have for a loan? The way that the conference has certain expectations about loans, how much collateral you should have on hand before you take out a loan, and what's the maximum amount they would allow. So the maximum amount that they would allow is yearly tithe times 3, which again equals $1 million. The conference would loan us $1 million. Okay? So the conference would loan us $1 million. We could raise $1 million. And we have, with the grant and our current funds, another $400,000 or so. And then we have the question of, would we be interested in selling this church, or would we want to keep it? We don't know. We haven't voted on that. There's not been any discussion. I tell you that we have had this building appraised. This building has been appraised, and years ago it came out to, okay, for a little under $500,000. So about half of $1,000,000 potentially is what it was appraised to, and that was a little while ago. So it's probably worth more, but you know how that is, selling a building of this age. You don't know how that's going to pan out. Anyway, it's another possibility. So the current grant, you could get about $240,000. Our current funds, well, you can see that. Well, let me go into that in more detail. This is actually behind because this is from September. We've actually added about $30,000 more since September. So our funds are growing quite rapidly. We are raising way over our budgeted amount every single month, which does show that we are in a position for a financial project, like the possibility of taking on a loan. We have savings, $40,000 in a revolving fund. Anyway, total of $221,000. Okay, and $43,000 currently in the building project as of September. So our fundraising, we could raise $1 million in 3 years. If we sold the current building, maybe possibly of $500,000. Our conference loan would give us about $1 million, which adds, everything would add up to about $2.8 million. So the building project that we're considering would cost approximately $3 million. And yes, that's if it was based on 12,000 square footage. And we believe that if we put 12,000 square foot at 300 per square feet, then it's more like 3.5 million. There's a possibility we can make the auditorium smaller, and we think that the $300 per square foot is a very conservative estimate. It's an estimate that is extremely conservative. We would more than likely come in lower than that, but we want numbers that are realistic. Does that make sense? That's why we came to 3 million is probably a realistic value, because we might possibly make the auditorium smaller. So yeah, that's what the funds look like. Now, phase 2, if you wanted to, say, build a dedicated church, if that dedicated church does not include a fellowship hall, it does not include a space to recreate in at all. There's literally pews in a building surrounded by Sabbath school classes. It's less than what we have here, because right now we have a fellowship hall. So in that building, if you built it like that, would probably also cost $3 million. To be good stewards and be realistic of where the position that we're in, we cannot build both. We can build one or the other, and you can either have a building with pews and no fellowship hall, which means you don't have a place to have potluck, means you lose a lot of potential evangelistic opportunities, and you lose recreational opportunities for our church family. Or we can build something that is multifunctional, and there's some serious downsides to a building structure like that. But it is within our means. Realistically, we could service $1 million loan in 10 to 15 years. Pay off that loan and then do another 3-year fundraising project and be in phase 2 in approximately 15 plus years after phase 1. Does that make sense?
I just had a comment there. You said after we paid the loan off, we could do another fundraiser. Well, the first fundraiser is to gather the money for the initial construction. Theoretically, we could do a second fundraiser as soon as we move into the building. We don't have to wait till that building's paid off to start that second fundraiser.
Yeah, and actually, there is a lot of cost involved in the first amount. So it doesn't cost another $3 million to build the second half. Does that make sense? Because a lot of that money is in developing the land, making the parking lot, building the plumbing, and all that stuff. And we would build the plumbing big enough, assuming that someday we're going to have phase 2. Does that make sense? And so a lot of that funds, to go from phase 1 to phase 2 is more like $1.5 million. Does that make sense? It's not in another $3 million. Phase 1 would cost like $3 million, but then to go into phase 2 would cost like $1.5 million extra. So actually it's a smaller scale cost. Of course, in 15 years, the prices may rise, but hopefully our incomes could keep up with that. You know, that's all future projections, which we can't foresee. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know that I mentioned this our last meeting. I'm still very concerned about the acoustics in this place.
Yep.
So I see that, oh yeah, it would be great to have it for for recreational activity, but the question is, what if we only are doing recreational activities once a month, but we're having to be dragging around with an acoustic situation that is just absolutely a disaster? That's I'm just being honest, that is my concern.
Yep.
And it's a serious one, because if we can't very well hear and it all becomes a big mumble, whether it's the music that's being played or sung or people speaking. So I have my reservations and concerns.
Yeah, and those are very well stated concerns. Did you want to add to the same thing, Kirk, before
basically.
I answer?
Yeah, basically.
Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
First of all, I have several concerns. First of all, fundraising, which is double tithe for 3 years. Secondly, the conference loan, which we'll be paying on, which is even more money that's going to be required. Thirdly, losing this church.
Yeah, which we don't, that's not a requirement.
Okay.
It's not a requirement.
That's one of the biggest concerns, because being here for 28 years and knowing what we've done and seen, my biggest issue is capacity not being what it once was. We can remember maybe 6-7 years ago where 150, 60 people, we were lined, we had downstairs, we had to plant Buford, had no choice. And that was, you know, I could see that if that was the issue right now. They would be like, oh man, there's just absolutely no problem at all doing it, and not as much issue coming up with the funds, because I've been in places where the churches were very strapped. And every Sabbath you come into church is like, oh, we need money, money, money. It's just like, that's all you heard. We don't have that issue here, and that's the thing. It's the beauty of what we have compared to what we know we would love to have, but the burden that would come with it financially. And that's why my prayer is, Lord, help us make sure that we're doing the right thing going forward.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, let me have an opportunity to respond to the concerns. Last Sabbath, I was in Gainesville. By the way, the Gainesville church pretty much looks exactly like what Phase 1 and Phase 2 combined are. We basically took Gainesville pictures and a couple of other church pictures and meshed them into one, okay? They have that exact thing, gymnasium with Sabbath school classes on both sides, and then a dedicated sanctuary. They have Phase 1 and Phase 2. They built it some years ago where costs were different, and they were able to do it more manageably. Every year that we sit on the idea, large building costs grow and grow and grow. For example, some years ago, the idea that we were thinking of was an absolute behemoth of a building. 30,000 square feet is what our previous architectural plans had. It had a complete dedicated K-12 school on the second story. It had a huge fellowship hall. It had a massive 400-seat capacity, a dedicated sanctuary with pews, and with 30,000 square feet. We looked at that now, and we estimated what it would cost, and more than like $7+ million. And back then, whenever we first started the conversation, I don't think it would have cost that. It would have been reasonable. It would have been more like $3.5 million back then if we would have built it more quickly and been more decisive back then, and it would have happened. Of course, I'm not saying God's leading has changed it, okay? So we're okay with where we are right now. But large building costs are growing, even in proportion to general inflation and general wealth income costs. Large building costs are still growing. So the more time we sit on the idea, the harder that dream looks from here. But I want to respond to some of the questions that you rose about acoustics. There are a lot of concerns about acoustics, but acoustics is not just, it's a large empty place with concrete floors and it's going to be terrible. There's a lot of options, okay? For example, one thing that helps with acoustics is the more cloth you have in the building, the more it absorbs echoey sounds. So one reason why the acoustics are good in here is because we have carpet, we have pews with cushions on them. That's one of the things that's absorbing. So even if we had an auditorium, if you had cloth chairs, fully cloth chairs, that actually does absorb quite a bit of sound. And though we probably would not have carpet on the floor, it doesn't have to be just hard concrete. Concrete is very echoey, but there's other floor things that are hard enough to, say, mop on after potluck, and yet not carpet, because you would never want to eat on carpet. That would be a disaster, right? So there's other floor options. There's things like cork and rubber, and some of those things actually do absorb sound. And what I saw when I was at Gainesville, both in their gymnasium and in their Phase 2 plan, their actual dedicated sanctuary with regular pews. No, actually, they don't have pews. They actually have movable chairs in their dedicated sanctuary. But they have these gigantic 10-foot by 10-foot squares on all the walls. And so they have this, it's designed for sound dampening and acoustics. Because even though that room has carpet in it, they still wanted that to improve the acoustics even further. So there's a lot of ways to manage issues of acoustics. We shouldn't assume that If it's going to be a large auditorium type structure, the acoustics are going to be terrible. Are they ever going to be like this? No. You cannot. You will sacrifice acoustics in some way, but we shouldn't presume that we absolutely are just going to have horrific acoustics just because it's an auditorium. Yeah, Marty, you have your hand up?
Oh, I've got just
Oh,
a
go ahead.
question. There's some people apparently got online late. Could you go back at some point when it's convenient and just show the layout again?
Yeah. In fact, I can pop that up on the screen right now.
The other thing that I want to share with everybody, and here again, I think when the acoustics, going to some of these churches that are auditorium-style churches and hearing for ourselves is going to be key. But in our conversations with Kevin, because we brought that up with Kevin, we were concerned about acoustics and all that. And the popularity of this church design is very popular around the country.
It's increasing significantly.
And the technology and the constructions of the walls and all that are far advanced than what we're used to in gymnasiums and all that. So even the walls are constructed to have acoustics in mind and the materials and the technology that they have in walls. So this construction approach of having a church gymnasium style, there's a lot of technology that's gone into it in recent years because of that popularity.
Yeah.
But here again, you know, I think it's something that we need to be keenly aware of. This design in this church is a replica of the Fayetteville, Georgia church. And, you know, we ought to go visit that church and see what it sounds like one Sabbath morning. And, you know, just get an idea of what's it like to have a church in that kind of setting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's one of the things that we're going to do if we move forward with ideas like this, is spend a lot of time doing more research about questions like that, acoustics, etc. I have personally been to auditorium churches that do not sound horrible. I think you can't ever fully match like a small room like this. You can't, it will never like be as nice as something like this, but it's not, I've been to some auditoriums that it's echoey, it's like, it sounds empty, hollow, horrible. But then I've been to other auditoriums where they've done a lot of work in issues like acoustics, and it sounds absolutely fine. So I think there's a lot of options and possibilities. Obviously, all of those things, you get what you pay for, right? Like if you care about it, you invest in that, you investigate it to make sure that that's a concern, then you get what you pay for. But it's going to be investment. Like for example, the walls that I mentioned before, to get really tall walls like that, those dividers, we're talking like $100,000 just for the dividers themselves. I mean, you're going to pay for that. But how much does that functionality mean to you? Does that make sense? If we say that functionality means a lot to me, well, then we pay for it. And how much does what dollar amount do you want to put on acoustics? Because you can have studio acoustics if you pay this much for it. But it's all options. But Kirk brought up a couple of other relevant questions that we should also, some other concerns we should also address. Firstly, there is no expectation that we have to sell this building. That is not a foregone conclusion or an expectation that this building must be sold in order to build a different building. There's a lot of questions, a lot of ideas that have been thrown out about like, well, what would we do with this building? Or why can't we make this into that dream? I think that should be obvious for a few reasons. We cannot make this property into our future dream because, number one, seating capacity. A lot of people ask me, why don't we just build a very simple gym down there and keep this? Well, for a few reasons. First of all, our number one reason why we're even considering any of this is capacity. We need more capacity in order to grow evangelistically. So it doesn't solve our number one concern. Number two, one of the ideas that have been thrown out there about this building is, why don't we keep this building and turn this into like a community center? I think that's a great idea. And I don't know what that means, but yeah.
I think also, we know of projects in different places that have gone wrong, and they end up having to sell, and they don't have that facility anymore, like in where Lona went to school.
Can I say something about that? Okay, so when Adventism first came into Denmark, the big thing was that they actually started a health message, and they built a sanitarium, and that's where the physical therapy school that I went to was started. And beautiful buildings on that property. There were also some historic buildings that the king had built there. He had his summer residence there. And anyway, long story short, it served for decades. It was a place where they educated literally physical therapists from both Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland. They came there to get educated in an Adventist program. And so what happened was that, all I can say is that then they also started this health food production program. But long story short, there were people sitting there making decisions about what was going to happen, and they were actually technically not qualified. In the end of it all, here's what happened. The school that I went to, that property, which was literally right on the ocean, you couldn't have any more beautiful property than that, sold. The sanitarium sold. The only thing that still stands there is one building where the downstairs part of the building, there's still a big physical therapy clinic, but the Adventists, they lost everything. And I'm sad about it because I feel like it was a huge mistake and it could have been prevented. So anyway, I just don't want us to get into something where we end up in a similar situation.
Okay, and then that's the history there. That's one of the instances. But the only thing is my concern is something that is, okay, 140 people is better than no place at all.
Yes.
And $500,000 today is nothing paid for. And it's, okay, we could do better. We could always do better. But in our desire to increase, are we putting at risk, being God's stewards, things that are there and here? So I would say, okay, let's go for this, but let's not lose what we have. That's my only concern. I would much rather say, all right, instead of 2 million, 2.8 million, 2.3 million, we're going to have to come up with the $500,000 some other way, but let's not lose. That's my biggest concern there. So I don't want to discount the dream of this beautiful facility and all the options that we have, but let's not lose what's been here for 30 years and that we are now rejoicing in and future generations. Because in 5 years, where am I going to be?
Yeah.
And everybody here, where are we going to be in 5 years? We can do a lot of things right now, but in 5 years, who's going to be here to see it?
You make a good point, and the Bible says to count the cost. Yes. And we need to be able to count the cost and make sure that the ideas are reasonable. Go ahead, Eddie.
So I have a realistic question for every church member. So how much are we responsible individually for the cost, just approximately?
I'm trying to wrap my mind around the question that you're asking. Are you asking me to say how many regular attending members are and then divide 3 million by that? I don't think that's a realistic question because everybody's income is different. So here, let me explain.
I understand.
Let me answer the question again, though. Let me ask the conference said that realistically, a really good fundraising program would be able to raise a double tithe. Okay, so we are dreaming that we could raise a double tithe. So you don't tell me what your tithe is, but if you want to know what you might be able to contribute, maybe it's a double tithe. It's another 10% of your income. That one might be the financial commitment that we're considering here.
So that could be in a year, right? In a year, double tithe. Full year.
When we
3 years?
A double tithe over a 3-year period of time. So the fundraiser would be seeking for us to raise the same amount that we get in tithing per year for 3 years straight, just for the building project. Now, a lot of people have this fear and this question, wait a minute, the pie is only this big. The pie is this big and you take out this slice, where does that money come from? Experience has shown us that those that come before us have realized that that's not as great a fear. Right now, that seems very scary to us, that idea. But experience has shown that what we need is really 2 things. We need God behind this, knowing that it's God's vision, and we need to be excited and passionate about it. And what we found is that churches that do fundraising campaigns actually increase in tithing, increase in church budget, and meet their financial goals most of the time. In fact, numerous churches have all experienced this very thing, that the general trend, most people fear, if we're going to be trying to raise all this money, then tithe is going to go down. Church budget's going to go down because people only have so much money. But the reality is that's not true. The reality is we all have so much money, but we are spending it in different areas. And what's going to happen is we're going to be more sacrificial. We're going to deny ourselves in those other areas because we're so passionate about God's dream that we are giving more to that. And besides, there's a lot of latent finances within the body, meaning there's a lot of people who have finances who are not giving. And one of the reasons they're not giving is because they're not passionate about our vision. And when we have a vision that is exciting, that the people are grasping and saying, we want this, we see a future here, suddenly people that were not giving before begin to give. And experience shows that in churches that are very committed, God-driven, tithing, church budget doesn't go down. Everything increases with the fundraising campaign. Marty had his hand up. Hope that answers your question, Eddie. But
to take what the pastor is describing and actually apply it to this church history, there's 3 things that this church has done in the past that proves the point you just made. Several years ago, we expanded the building in the back. Maybe Jeff or Kurt remembers, but I think that expansion was around $50,000. It was $150,000, and we had a 10-year note on it. Yeah. And I think we paid it off in 3 years. 3 years, something like that. Less than 5 years. Less than 5 years. So here's this financial challenge that came to the church, and yet it's not as much as $2 million. But here again, we were a much, much smaller church. When we started that expansion, I think our average attendance was maybe around 30 people. Maybe that. Yeah, maybe 30 people at that point. So relative, it was comparable. The other thing of it is, in both cases where we planted a church, when you plant a church and 15 or 20 of your members go to help start that church, their tithe goes with them. That tithe doesn't stay on the books it does, but the money goes to the church plan itself. So if you look at the books, well, the money's still here, but it actually goes over to that church. And in both cases, when we've actually planted those church, if you look at the financial data, you see that immediate dip because we're letting that money go to that plant church. But within just a short few months, you see our monthly income and our financials come right back up. they just return because people believe in what we're doing to plant church. More people come in, more people give. So when you have a positive activity going on in your congregation and your church, people want to participate in it.
Yeah, and Marty, they gave us I can't remember the number, but they said the projection of church growth when you build a new building is approximately, do you remember that number? I think they said something, I can't remember the number, don't quote me on this, but they said typical average projection of church growth when you build a new building project where you have a lot of extra seating, that your church will grow like 1.5% over 3 years or 1.25%, 125% over a 3-year period of time. So in other words, if we had 100 people average attendance now, we build a building like that, we would have 125 people average attendance within just 1-2 years, something like that is what they were suggesting. So attendance actually dramatically increases right away in a building project like this. And typically finances actually increase in a project like this. Costs increase because we're not only are we covering the regular electricity, heating, cooling, water of a larger plant, but we are also covering a note, the loan from the conference. So costs increase, but typically income increases too, is what we have been, the information that we've been receiving from all those professionals that have come before us. Go ahead, John.
I just had a quick thought to Kirk's point about, this church. If we decide to move forward with the new one, until we really have an appraisal here, we have no idea what this church is, and that may change people's minds depending on what this is valued at. And it could be considerably more than $500,000. In fact, I would be shocked if it's not.
Yeah, we don't know. Those are all questions that I don't think this meeting is intended to answer. We can toy with those conversations, but I'm not expecting a vote. I'm not expecting any consensus on what we do with this building in this conversation. The purpose of this meeting is twofold. To explain data of the ideas that are going around in our heads, to explain why we're thinking these ideas, and if there's strong consensus tonight, we can vote to take the next step in this. If there's not strong consensus, or if you say, hey, I want to see more of this. I want more information before we take the next step. That's what the purpose of this meeting is. Yeah, go ahead, Lona.
Yeah. So I just want to make one comment. We talked about that part of the reason why we're having a second of these meetings was because there weren't a lot of people at the first meeting. But quite frankly, everything considered, I'm just not seeing, I don't know how many people are watching online, but I'm still not seeing a lot of people. And my concern is, what is the explanation for that? That's one question I have. And then the next question I have is the average age of the person that's in this sanctuary right now. We also have to think about, I'm getting older myself, even though, God willing, I would love to keep working as long as I can, but there is going to be a time where I know I will be on a fixed income and that I won't have any excessive extra amount of money that I can just dump into a building project. And I just think we have to be very realistic about what we are all sitting in. We can't ignore that. That's my opinion.
I agree with you, Lona. I'm pretty concerned about the attendance at our meetings, and I'm nervous about the idea of making any kind of vote without a stronger number of people being represented and more people buying in. I 100% agree with you. By the way, to answer your question about the age of people, statistics show that the vast majority of donations to any churches come from those in their 55 and up category. That's just a fact. So actually, in all churches, those that are more mature in age are carrying the weight of the financial responsibility of the church, in every church. We like to imagine that it's those young people in their 40s that are at the top of their career, but it's not. Why? Because those that are more mature in age are usually more sacrificial and have less complicated child-rearing things to invest money into. Like, for example, think about people like the Villarreals who have their kids in school. They got so much money invested in education right now. So, yeah, you think that the younger people are the ones that are carrying the note, but they're not. The older ones are.
Yeah. I like to think outside of the box a little bit. And you're talking fundraising. You know, I think more than just we who are here. I mean, if there's things we can do, you know, to try to reach individuals willing to, you know, to donate to, and you know, to church, to congregations trying to build. I mean, those are things that some of us who are very good at that, I mean, already into that kind of thing in business, might want to start exploring that too, so that if we had some things that were done, you know, $500,000, $1 million somewhere, somehow come in to this project, that would change a lot.
Yeah.
That would change a whole lot. So I'm thinking, you know, we might want to do a little bit more investigating in that area as well.
The reality, yeah, thank you, Kirk. I'm always open to any new ideas for raising funds. And there are some people who are really gifted in those areas. Most projects like this receive a windfall amount at some point in time. A windfall amount is a really large donation from one particular family. Usually there's a project like this, at some point along it, whether it's at the very beginning to seed the project or whether it's at the end because we thought we had the money but it didn't show up. And usually there's one family or one or two families that end up making a significant sacrifice. And they
may not even be in this area. They may hear it through the grapevine, and they have an inheritance.
Yeah, that's the same thing that happened.
They're about ready to lose their life or something, and they're like, "I want my money to go somewhere."
Yeah, that's the same thing that happened with Pastor Jeff.
In Auburn, Georgia, that's trying to grow. Whoa. This is a miracle, but miracles happen.
Yeah, I don't mean to cut you off. I'm trying to talk because I got the microphone and you don't. I don't want the people who are online to hear silence. The same exact thing happened with Pastor Jeff. He was working on a building project in Florida. There were some issues. They thought it was going to cost this, and it costed this, mainly because of hurricane issues on the beach that they did not calculate. And their project went basically bankrupt halfway through. And some guy who was not a member of that local congregation donated a huge amount of money that made the project go through. And things like that happen in projects like this. Of course, all of us should not be waiting for the rich guy to drop some money. We should be saying, if I vote on this, I'm voting my commitment in my wallet. I'm not just voting my commitment in prayer. I'm voting my commitment financially because I believe in the idea and the dream and what God is going to do for this. And in addition to money, one thing is, we can talk about statistics, like on average, tithes usually increase and all that stuff, but what it really comes down to, honestly, is it God's will and are we united on it? Is it God's will and are we united? Hence, the first question, is it God's will? Hence the reason for fasting and prayer for today. For us to be really genuinely seeking, is this God's plan for us? And is it united? I think part of the answer comes to that question of, involving more people at church, like Lona was speaking to. Where's everybody else that was here this morning? There was over 90 people here this morning. There's 25 maybe here today. Where's everybody else? That's part of our question, right? This congregation has a lot of irregular people, a lot of people who are bouncing between congregations. And let's just be frank for a second. Those people are not the ones who are going to be dropping their whole life savings on our project. The people who are sitting here are our most committed givers. The people in this room are, and a few others that are on vacation right now, are the people who are supporting this congregation financially. A lot of the people that, for example, were here earlier today and are not here today are the people who actually are not contributing to this congregation financially. And that's not true in every case. There's some people who are, viewing online, who attended here earlier today and are viewing online, or don't drive in the evening. So I'm making a general statement, but you get the point. 7:30-ish. I was thinking about closing sometime around now. Or is there any other questions? I guess my next question is, where do you think we should go from here? What is the next step on your hearts? What's the next step on your hearts?
I had a question about the building. Is there any way, I see these buildings being made and they're not really situated to the environment, and they cost a lot to heat and cool. They have high-pitched roofs that cost a gazillion dollars to re-roof. Is there any consideration with your architect on those kind of questions?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Like the way the sun direction is coming and all that stuff. Yeah.
With your overhangs and.
Yeah, to be honest, our architect helped us throw these conceptual designs together based on some designs we already had for free. Those conversations have not been had with our current architect. We have discussed a little bit of the lay of the land and realistically, if we needed a retaining pond, where would that be on the property, etc. We have not discussed ideas of like the orientation of the building and the overhangs. We haven't gotten that far in the conversation. That's all yet future. But back to the question that I just threw out there. Where would you like to go from here? What do you believe is the next step in this project? Go ahead, Bill.
Wait a minute. Please.
I remember when we joined the Adventist church and were newly married and needed all the money we had. And I stopped working Sabbaths and, but we started paying tithe and offerings. And I think what we need to consider is that God blesses. When we do our part, God's math is not our math. Amen. And so many times as I've talked to people and given Bible studies, hey, I can't explain it. I can only tell you my experience. And that is, as we give, God blesses. And I think the Lord will bless our efforts. I'm for going forward.
Okay. That's one thought. Marty, I'm going to let you get the microphone.
As Pastor Jeff knows, and many of y'all, I'm invested in this project. I've been involved in this for a number of years. But listening to people tonight, looking at the turnout, I think, even though I'm in favor of moving forward, I'm like Lona. I'd like to see a larger commitment from our congregation before we call a vote. That's just my thought for the evening.
I agree. By the way, I actually talked to a number of people who were here earlier today and let me know that they wish they could have been here but can't be here. By the way, every person that told me that is in favor of moving forward. And I said, you need to be at the meeting to make that decision. You need to hear the questions, and I told them, we're not considering any votes by proxy. You need to be here. You need to hear the questions, the concerns, the numbers, but there's a lot of people who actually are in favor of moving forward that are not here just because they believe in the vision, but they don't know all the details yet.
I have a question. Would you allow people to vote if they were on, if they watched it online?
I think that's a very reasonable thing. The church manual says that any vote cannot be done by proxy. That means tell somebody else, I didn't hear any of the meeting, but I tell somebody else what my vote is. That's not right. But if they heard the whole meeting, they understand the complications, they've heard the discussion, they should have a right to vote. But we haven't committed to the idea of taking a vote yet.
Oh, no, I know. And my other question would be, is there a better timing? Is there a better time to do it?
Yep.
I don't know what that is, but it seems like it's a little rough to leave here at 1 and for some people to get back here by 4 and then, I don't know.
But there's always an excuse.
Well, there is, but if we had it around something else, maybe I'm thinking like on a Sunday afternoon or right after, well, but it wasn't published not enough last time. Enough people did not know. And my other thing would be, why not right after church? Is that, and I'm a new Adventist, maybe that's illegal. But.
No, the only reason that we decided to have this meeting right now is because it involves a lot of questions about finances. Yeah. And we prefer not to get in lots of detailed questions about finances on the Sabbath day because, you know, buying and selling is just not necessarily a Sabbath topic. But if it's just a matter of somebody else, so for example, if we tell everybody, go and watch the discussion that we had about finances and the objections and come for a vote. Then we could do it on Sabbath. We could do it immediately after church on Sabbath. If they understood the questions that have been arisen, they understand the complications, and we can be confident that they're informed. Go ahead, Kirk.
All right. Yeah, right now, like Lona and Marty, I feel like there's not enough representation. But if we can look at it in another 6 months or 3 months in the beginning of the year and see how things are changing and what have you. And another thing is my issue is, you know, making sure we hold on to our church that we have so that we're not left without. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Because mine is always worst case. Mine's always the worst case, and you know, I love this church. I love what we have right here, and I love this opportunity, and I want to see us grow, and I want all this. I want that too, but you can't have both sometimes, and that's the problem we're having right here, I think. Yeah. And I just think right now I'm not ready to say yes, go forward, but I'm not saying that won't change. Okay. In 3 to 6 months. Okay. So let me clarify what you're saying here for a second. Some people are saying there's not enough representation right now, but there could be enough representation shortly. You're putting the time frame a little bit further back than that. And so I'd like to hear from some of the others about what your feelings are about getting more representation. And if there is more representation sooner than that, I don't know. But go ahead, Lona.
Well, I just, I still have this feeling or this thought that I am disappointed that not more people, they have chosen to find time to come because it has been talked about several Sabbaths. So to me, that's one thing. And then the second thing is, so are we trying to just manipulate the situation so we can still get it to fit into our thought process? Or are we going to take this as an honest expectation? Because this is a huge project to take on. And if it's not all heart in and all hands on deck, I just personally don't think that we need to take this on. I'm just being frank.
I agree with you, Lona. I agree with you. Because I think that if we just show up to church and say, hey, who wants a new church? And if there are a lot of people who are half-hearted and they think everybody else is going to pay for it, then they're going to vote for a new church. But the question is, are they considering the cost? And to show up outside of church time, to come in the evening or come on a Sunday, shows a buy-in. And I agree with you. I agree.
I have two questions or two thoughts. Number one, how many are watching online tonight?
Stephen?
4? 5. Okay, and the second thing is there a way to somehow contact some of our members and see how they feel. A lot of people just aren't attending like they should to these events. I mean, not just this event, but other events. And so maybe if we had a way of contacting them on a personal level and see how they really feel about it, if they would commit to it. It'd be a big undertaking probably, but you might get a better consensus.
Yeah, you're right. I'm hoping I'm not the one that's going to make all the phone calls.
No, not just phone calls, but maybe a personal visit.
Yeah.
Assigning.
You're probably right, Connie.
Well, then you would know how people feel.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people just don't.
Yeah. By the way, those of you who didn't hear online, how many people are viewing online? It's 5. 5 people are viewing online. All right. I think there's a general consensus right now that we need more consensus. We need more buy-in from the church body. I think we generally have come to that consensus. The next question is, what does that look like? What should be our expectation? Should we plan another meeting shortly?
I'd be in favor of that.
Should we say to the church audience, look, we're interested in taking a vote, but there's just not enough people who are here, and we just can't move forward. What does that look like?
I think we need to think realistically. We're coming into the holiday seasons for the Thanksgiving and Christmas coming up. But I think planning something in January, mid to late January or February is probably realistic. And I think what we need to do is really put together a message, a broadcast. Connie talks about calling people, but we have got to deliberately reach out to our membership and say it as many times as required. This is an important decision. We need you here. Mm-hmm. And we need to say that every time we have any type of meeting organization, whether it's prayer meeting, parents coming to Pathfinders, worship on Sabbath. We just need to be pretty deliberate about how important it is for people to show up.
Okay, Elian and Georgiana also had their hands up.
Kind of what Marty was saying, I just wanted to add some numbers to that idea. Ideally, every member should be present for something like this. That's ideal. But what is the accepted amount, like percentage-wise? How many members do we need to have in an assembly here in order to take a healthy vote?
Well, on Sabbath, we're hitting about 90 right now. I'd like to see for half that, at least here, at least 45, 50 people at a business meeting. At least that,
Well, and then my follow-up question just to that is 50% representation healthy?
That's a good question.
Here's the reality.
In my mind, I was thinking 75% before any numbers were tossed around.
How many of the people that are attending on Sabbath are actually members of our church, or actually committed, regular attending visitors? Because we've not been measuring that well, and I'm telling you, it's more than you think. There's a larger number than you think of people that are coming here on Sabbath. And I'm telling you, people I've met like 10 people in the last 2 months. And I asked them, where do you normally worship? They said, here. They told me their name. And I know I've read the church books 100 times. Their name's not on the church books. But they say this is their church. But I've only seen them once. And I met them for the first time. A lot of the people that are coming here are not members. They're not. And they're not going to come to this meeting because they don't, it's not that they don't want a new church, but they don't feel like they have the right to come in here. We have a significant number of regular attending Sabbath people that are not members, nor are they the people that are going to fund this. Just being honest.
Okay, last thought. Is there any way we can maybe perhaps solve this issue before moving forward with our bigger church? Figure out a way to get the opinion that of the members, whether they're attending in various areas. Remember, one of the 2 objectives was union in this moving forward. I think we have to achieve that before we can achieve finances, any of this.
I'm not sure if I understand the answer to your. I'm not sure if I understand your.
So like I think we should figure out a solution to this problem of attendance, or where are the members and how can we reach their opinion before moving forward with a building project. I think we literally need to maybe pause this for just a second, figure out this little issue, and then we can resume.
Okay. Georgiana's got her hand up. I think she's got something to add to this conversation.
I mean, I was downstairs with the kids for a little bit, so I don't know if somebody already said this, but I was thinking as an idea, since a lot of members, they come Saturday morning, but they cannot come to these meetings. And I was thinking a solution maybe would be to just make maybe like a list with what's the important points and put them in the program in the morning. So to make like some papers with all the information that you guys think that are important, to send emails, or to put that list, that piece of paper with all the info about the construction and put them in the program, and then ask the opinion of the people. And you can say, if you have an opinion or something, just send me an email or call me, or I don't know. I'm thinking of different ways to reach to the people instead of just coming to a meeting.
Yeah, I agree with you, Georgiana, that we can publicize the vision better than we have been, but we want to see buy-in. We want to see that not just, can they answer an email, but if somebody cares about a project, they can show up at a meeting. I mean, come on. Come on. They can at the very least, show up and watch it on YouTube.
I don't think people knew it was on YouTube tonight.
It wasn't publicized, you're right. But
and we could do better. Not trying to cut you off, but I think we could do a better job of having some pictures up or something around the church. No, I mean, you would never know we were even considering a $3 million project if you walked around here. And I'm not being critical. I'm just saying that would, if we want to get some interest and really find, maybe we're not going to do it. I don't know, but we really haven't done much marketing. I guess is what I'm saying.
And honestly, the reason we haven't is because we haven't wanted to present the message that we are doing this.
That's not. Sure I don't think people would. I don't think people would take it that way. I would. I mean, it's an idea that we need your input on. It's not something that is being forced down from the top. I guess that's what I would say.
You're right. We can communicate. We can communicate the idea better than we have been, and especially I think the best platform is Sabbath mornings during announcements. Hey,
I agree.
Here's a nut. Hey, we should have a regular nugget from the building project about, hey, these are the ideas. This is what we got going on. Get people more interested, aware of what's going on. But at the end of the day, they have to have buy-in. We have to have buy-in. All right. I think there's consensus. We need to figure out what is our expectation of buy-in. There's an idea to push this to January-ish, maybe January, February-ish, and try to, once again, make a strong push, say, hey, we need everybody here for this meeting because we expect to have a vote. Is there anything else that needs to be spoken before we close? Bill?
Hang on.
Wait for the microphone, Bill.
Please.
I just wonder where all the Nehemiahs are. I mean, when he started, the people in the locally weren't even helping. I mean, but it's when the building project got started, it went well. And I just think if the Lord's in the plan and we believe He is, then we ought to move forward. And I think keep putting it off. I think we ought to make a decision and stick with it.
No, I agree with you, Bill. My question is the Lord in the plan? Because I think that one of the answers to my prayer, if the Lord is in the plan, is He's going to bring unity. And unity is shown by presence and commitment.
Well, one thing that, and I've told this thing a lot of the time, but I was in a Catholic church, and they had a nice church, but they had this big building project. They had the church up front, a model of it, about 5 foot tall. That's what we need. And it had a thermometer on it where they were and their fundraising, and they had about 80% of what they needed. And, it was there to look at and to see. And if every Sabbath we looked up there and saw it, it takes promotion
Yeah,
It takes
that's what I want to
promotion
do
to
once
raise
we
money.
vote. Once we vote, we're going to do all those things.
I don't agree. I think we should do that before we vote. I think to see a picture of this final beautiful church is going to get people bought in. And we may still decide, but at least that we're not going to do it. But at least people, you've got to see something. I think that's part of the problem of why people aren't here. And maybe that's not right, but that's just how people are.
Okay. You guys are right. We can communicate the vision better.
Yes, let's do that.
Okay. We'll communicate the vision better. We'll plan another future meeting down the road. And we'll make a strong appeal for attendance and participation at that meeting. I think we're ready to adjourn. Would you all bow your heads with me as I pray? Lord God, I thank you for the unity that we have had to this point, that we are a lot speaking the same language. We want to see more people here. We want to see more buy-in from our church. And we just want to hear your voice, Lord. We do believe that one of the ways that you communicate your plans to us is through unity in the body. So, Lord God, we pray that if this is your plan, make it evident, because the body is behind it. And I pray that you help us to communicate that vision clearly. Lord, show us how to bring it before the people and say, these are the ideas that's on the plate. This is what we have that we're considering, so that people know, that people can have the opportunity to even become interested and excited in it. And Lord God, I pray that you continue speaking to our hearts individually. Between now and our next meeting, I believe in the power of the Holy Spirit to speak vision to our hearts. And so I pray that we pray, I ask, Lord, that you convict us to pray earnestly for this and regularly and committedly so that we can each hear your voice. I pray for also more participation in regards to our fasting and prayer, because I believe that that brings unity of vision and unity of clarity of your will into our lives. Thank you, Lord, for hearing these prayers. We're ready to go as you show us, Lord. Open the door or close it according to your will, and may we be ready to hear and to march. This we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.